Hello, my name's Rob Davies, and I'm Head of Policy and Dialogue at Closer, the UK's partnership of social and biomedical longitudinal population studies. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Dr. Charlotte Campbell and Jennie Blows. I'm going to hand over now to Jennie and Charlotte to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennie. I'm the Digital Communications and Events Manager for Closer.
Hello, I'm Charlotte. I'm Closer Policy Research Fellow.
Today, we're going to be talking about how to effectively mobilise scientific research in the policy landscape. But first, a little bit about Closer. We are the interdisciplinary partnership of leading UK social and biomedical longitudinal population studies. We are funded by the UKRI Economic and Social Research Council and based at UCL. Our mission is to increase the visibility, use and impact of longitudinal population studies, data and research to ensure that longitudinal evidence is used to address the challenges facing the UK now and in the future. So we're going to cover several aspects of effective knowledge mobilisation today. We're going to look at how to generate policy impact from scientific research, where you can find calls for evidence from policy actors, how you can best frame your research for maximum policy impact, what products you need to produce to cut through the noise and get the attention of busy policymakers, and where you can get bespoke advice and guidance and tools to help you on your policy impact journey. So now I'm going to hand over to Charlotte to talk about what is policy impact and the policy landscape.
Thanks, Rob. So before we get into the kind of nuts and bolts of things, it's always important to think about the why and what we're trying to achieve by mobilising knowledge and engaging with policy. And so what is this impact? There are two main types of impact that researchers are generally aiming for when we're engaging with policy. There are other types of impact, but the two main ones we're going to cover here are instrumental and conceptual impact. So instrumental impact is about influencing the development of policy, practice or service provision, shaping legislation and altering behaviour. And this is kind of the gold medal of policy impact, but it's really difficult to achieve as all of these processes that are outlined under instrumental impact are really complex and are driven by many factors, often outside of research evidence. So there's also conceptual impact, which is about contributing to the understanding of policy issues, reframing debates and kind of discussions around a topic. And this is where we see a lot of the impact of academic research evidence. It's a little bit less complex to achieve that conceptual impact. And then ultimately, we'd hope that some conceptual impact would maybe lead to instrumental impact in the future. So next, we're going to look at the policy landscape. So the policy landscape, we'll focus on the UK, but this kind of applies across the board, is a complex and multi-layered. So for example, in the UK, there are 4 pairs of governments and parliaments across the UK. We've got the UK government and UK Parliament. We also have Scottish Government, Scottish Parliament, Welsh Government, the Welsh Parliament and Senate, and a Northern Ireland Executive and a Northern Ireland Assembly. And then under kind of central and these devolved governments, there are departments, non-departmental public bodies, arm's length bodies, and other public sector organisations that will have specific remits. So there's kind of lots of layers and it's quite complicated. And it's critical to understand what kind of role a policy organisation is taking as researchers trying to engage with that organisation. We kind of need to understand what sort of evidence they need, what stance they're taking, what perspective they have, and what they need to do with that evidence. And one of the main kind of big differences in what sort of roles an organisation has is delivery versus scrutiny. So governments are all about delivery. They're developing and delivering policy. They're drafting new laws, whereas parliaments take on a scrutiny role. So they scrutinise and examine the policy that has been delivered by governments. They vote on legislation and debate key issues. So whether an organisation takes a delivery or scrutiny role, they're going to be have a slightly different perspective. and evidence need, that you'll kind of need to tailor your engagement to that need that they have and that perspective. It's also really key to understand the remit and focus of the organisation geographically. So on this map, these are all kind of national level organisations, but if we look at the next slide, we'll also see there are regional and local governance and governing organisations as well, like councils and combined authorities. And these will have a different geographic focus to national level organisations. They'll be more interested in evidence and data that is relevant to their particular area. So it's really important to understand this landscape, the institutions that you're engaging with, understand what their perspective is, where they're looking, what they're particularly interested in, so you can make sure and understand how your research is relevant and useful to them, so you can direct it to the right people in the right way. So now we understand the kind of policy landscape. Let's think about individual policymakers and what really influences them when they're making a decision. So policymakers are human beings just like you and me, and so they're subject to a range of influences. And you can see some of these in these jigsaw pieces on this slide. So we've got things like their own beliefs, their emotions, their values, maybe politics and the political party manifesto. We've also got things like stories and anecdotes, relationships with other people, public attitudes, maybe media pressure. And you can see one of those jigsaw pieces is scientific evidence. But what we're trying to highlight to you on this slide is that scientific evidence is not enough by itself. And sometimes to kind of get the attention of these busy policymakers and increase the chances of having achieving policy impact through your research, we kind of need to use some of these other jigsaw pieces, some of these other influences to have that bigger impact. And so some examples of this include using things like storytelling, clearly linking your research findings to a government priority, or maybe using the media to push for change. So next, we're going to go over some other policy impact challenges. And these are all based on some real quotes that we've collected over the years that illustrate some of these challenges. And then we have some of our advice on how to address these. So the first challenge comes from, it's a quote by Dame Angela McLean, who's the government chief scientific advisor, who said, "It is critical to be aware that a minister only has 3 minutes to make a decision, so brevity is key." So here we're just highlighting how very little time, in this case, it's a minister, so very, very senior policymaker, politician has to make a decision. I think we can all agree 3 minutes is a frighteningly short amount of time to fully consider kind of all the research evidence and other evidence behind making that decision. So the solution to this challenge as researchers who kind of want to engage in this process is to construct your elevator pitch and have something really short and really punchy that kind of gets that message across within that 3 minutes or however long you have to kind of to influence that minister or that decision maker. And how you can do this is firstly really understanding the evidence needs. So we've spoken before in the landscape, trying to understand the organisation and kind of their perspective and what they need. Having your elevator pitch really tailored to the precise evidence needs that person needs from you means it's already going to be punchier and really kind of hits home and answers the question that they have in their head. And also focusing on actionable recommendations. So here's my evidence and this is what you can do with it. That is really very useful to someone who has to make a decision based on that evidence very quickly. So the next challenge, it comes from a couple of quotes. The first one comes from a UK government official who said, "Most day-to-day policy work rests on the twin pillars of Google and asking people we know." And then kind of more recently, we've had quotes from a civil servant in the UK government who said, "We used Perplexity AI to identify academics working in a research field." So this challenge is all about visibility and relationships. Kind of the policy landscape, the policy engagement kind of sphere is all about people, and it's a people business. So yeah, this challenge is all about having your research and yourself be visible to these people, so they can find it using Google, or you're one of the people that they know, you appear on the Google search, you appear in that AI search. And so the solution here is to increase your visibility and the findability of your research. And to do this, you can, one of the biggest things you can do is have a really clear academic profile, which has your research interests, your recent research kind of publications, what you're working on, what your expertise is. So if someone is looking for someone with that expertise, you appear in that list, you appear in the Google search, you appear when AI is looking for that information. But also it's about building relationships. So becoming that person that people we know, becoming one of those people, building relationships and getting your name and your research out there, so you come to mind when someone is asked about that particular topic or thinks about that research area. You're one of those people who they already know is working in that field. And one of the ways you can kind of help to build those relationships and also increase the visibility is by responding to calls for evidence. So when there are formal calls, maybe a parliament inquiry or a consultation or another call for evidence of some variety, responding to that means that your name and your research is already out there. It's on lists, it's known to kind of the field and the people working in that area. So again, it's another way of kind of getting on the list and being visible and coming to mind when policymakers are thinking about particular research areas. The next challenge is based on a quote from a member of Parliament who said, "I'm sick to death of getting briefings that are just full of academic jargon." The solution here is to adapt your language and style for a policy audience. So the way that we write for a policy audience is going to be quite different to writing an academic paper, for example. And it means using jargon-free, plainly written language, focusing on solutions rather than diagnosing a problem. We often say it's about kind of reversing an academic paper. So in an academic paper, a big chunk of it is about, really in detailed methods and results, which are obviously very important and required. But in this context, often they are not as important or necessary to kind of go into the details of the methods. The main part of the paper that a member of Parliament would need to hear is what you did very briefly, and then what you found and kind of what they can do with that, what that means to them, what can they, how can that research kind of influence the decision that they need to make, and how they should make that decision. So you'd be good to have a big focus on research findings and the recommendations from your work. There's also some slight adjustments to specific language you can do. So we've all written it, but in research papers, we often put in our discussion, more research is needed on this particular topic, etc., etc. But we found from experience that the people in the policy world don't particularly like the phrase "more research is needed." It doesn't really land in the same way. It's not useful for them. They much prefer the phrase "evidence gaps," and they can take this and kind of understand where there are gaps, and they can take that gap and know where they need more evidence and where they need to direct any resources or kind of other research that they might be looking into. So it ultimately means the same thing, but there's slight changes to language that just help and adapt your style, so it resonates more with a policy audience. And I think the final challenge is based on a quote from a government advisor who said, "I'm more likely to be asked by a minister to comment on a podcast or newspaper article than an academic paper." And I think we can all agree academic papers are a bit dry. They're not always the most interesting, thrilling things to read. So I'm sure we can all understand this quote and where this kind of challenge comes from. But as an academic, what can we do about this to make our research kind of more impactful? And so the solution here is to enhance that kind of classic academic paper that we produce with accessible and easily digestible content. And how we can do this is by using the taste, snack, feast approach, which Rob will go through in a little bit, but it's all about producing a range of products that kind of complement that academic paper and appeal to different audiences. So you're kind of spreading the net as wide as you can in the outputs that you have and kind of who would be interested in them and what the information is included in there. And it's things like producing briefing notes, blogs, infographics, maybe social media posts, all pulling on different elements of that paper and appealing to a wider audience. So I think I'm passing over to Rob to talk about effectively mobilising research.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Charlotte. So yeah, now I'm going to provide a few insights into how to effectively mobilise your research. So the first thing to do and the first thing to think about to increase the impact and engagement with your research and your evidence is that it's critical to align it to or relate it to current real-world policy challenges and topics of interest. So this helps you speak the same language as policymakers and matches with what policy actors, for example, civil servants, committee clerks, parliamentary committee clerks, or politicians are focusing on currently. So I've got some examples there. The UK government missions, for example, Healthy Lives, sticking with government as well, government departments and public bodies, many public bodies produce areas of research interests. Parliamentary committees as well produce areas of research interests, which I'll come on to in a little bit. And also, has been mentioned by Charlotte, there's parliamentary committee inquiries as well. So these can come from any of the parliaments, the UK Parliament or the devolved parliaments, the Senate, for example. And these are basically calls for evidence and insights on particular topics, which can range from anything from healthy ageing to use of social media by young people, to gambling behaviours. So it's really worth kind of engaging with those parliamentary committees and kind of thinking about your visibility. But critically, it's about linking and aligning your research to current real-world policy challenges and thinking about kind of actionable recommendations in that context. In terms of real-world policy challenges, it also really helps you when applying for research grants. So it helps to demonstrate the policy relevance of your proposal. And when reviewers see that you've kind of thought about how your research, how the research addresses real-world policy challenges, you have a much better chance of being successful. So now I'm going to talk about some of the vehicles that we found most effective to mobilise research. So I mentioned the areas of research interest. So going to talk about the government areas of research interest first. So this is basically a bespoke kind of vehicle for the research community, for academics, to engage with policy challenges, policy topics. And what it does, each government department or public body, it summarises the most important questions or kind of topics for each department, and there's a kind of call for evidence there. And as you can see, we've highlighted a few new ARIs that have come out recently, some from the Welsh Government and also from a public body from the Food Standards Agency. So yeah, do please have a look at the ARIs and search for your research interest there to see if there's any calls for evidence. Parliamentary committees in recent years have also been producing areas of research interest. Again, as I said here, it's a direct call for research evidence to support the scrutiny process. And a few examples there, the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, have produced ARIs, and there's some new ARIs from the Scottish Parliament as well. So again, well worth having a look at those. And finally, just to touch on parliamentary committee inquiries again, This is an invitation to submit written evidence to an inquiry on a particular topic. It's a wide call for evidence, so from people, from practitioners, but also from academics as well. And there's just an example there: a Work and Pensions Committee had an inquiry on youth employment, education and training. And they said that they were really keen to hear from academics and researchers kind of working in that area to help them with their scrutiny process. So now we're going to move on to some more practical aspects. Charlotte already mentioned the taste, snack, feast model. We also call it the wedding cake approach because it's quite easy to remember. Wedding cake is layered, as you can see there in the image. And very briefly, what you've got there is the feast at the bottom, the big bit, which is the research paper, basically the research and the research paper and the data that kind of underlines that. A snack is a more kind of a shorter version, a kind of summary of that research. And the taste aspect is an even shorter product that in a snapshot gets across the kind of key point or points of your research. So basically the kind of concept behind Taste, Snack, Feast is it enables the people that you're trying to target and engage with the content which is most suited to them. So, for example, their level of interest, their level of expertise, but crucially with policy actors, the amount of time that they have. These are busy people with lots of demands and kind of lots of calls on their time, and kind of lots of people trying to vie for attention. And what the Taste, Snack, Feast or wedding cake approach does is creates a multi-layered portal into different expressions of a single narrative. So basically what you have here is the same narrative, the same story going through all these different layers. And what you do is create a range of different products in different ways and use different platforms to help maximize the impact of your research. So social media posts and infographics as a taste, and then policy briefing notes and blogs for a snack. And then you have the underlying research papers and the data that informs all these products. But basically it's the same message, the same thing going all the way through, but in slightly different lenses. And the reason because of this is it's not enough to just make research available, basically. So policymakers need to be targeted, and evidence needs to be framed to motivate the recipient, to motivate them to make use of that evidence. And what this does ultimately is the approach encourages you to think about a package of outputs to enhance your research and maximize the chances of cutting through the noise, getting noticed, and achieving impact. So policy briefing notes are the bread and butter of the policy world. So if you think about people who work for ministers or kind of work in a local authority, they are continually producing kind of short briefing notes, whether to brief their minister or to provide updates or kind of to summarize projects, and it's one of it's a really effective way of mobilizing your research in the policy landscape. So as we say here, presentation of your research findings and your recommendations is absolutely critical. Policymakers, as Charlotte mentioned, are kind of interested in actionable recommendations. Often if you think about parliamentarians that, they can kind of take forward, they can deliver within a parliamentary term. And the feedback that we had from many researchers, particularly early career researchers, is that they really kind of struggle with producing policy briefing notes. They're kind of looking at a blank page and thinking kind of, what do I do? Where, what do I say? Kind of where do I go next? So what we've done is produce a bespoke interactive tool, which can help you basically build a policy briefing note. We've got guidance there. We've got some examples as well to help you produce a concise briefing note to capture policymakers' attention. We've mentioned parliamentary committees and how important it is to engage with calls for evidence to increase the visibility of yourself and your research. And again, similar to a policy briefing note, we've produced a bespoke tool to help you create your own impactful written evidence submission. As with the briefing note tool, it guides you through how to construct an effective and impactful submission, and it creates a Word document ready for you to submit to the relevant parliamentary committee. So do please take a look at those tools. So now I'm going to pass over to Jennie, who's going to talk about more of the elements of Taste and Act Feast or wedding cake approach. Thanks, Jennie.
Thanks, Rob. So now I'm going to talk about some ways that you can communicate your research beyond those kind of usual academic circles via some of these accessible products that Rob and Charlotte have already mentioned during their talks. So we'll look at writing blogs, creating your own infographics, and using social media. And I'll talk through some best practice and tips for each of these. So starting with blogs, many of you may already have some experience with writing these. Some of you maybe haven't, but these are a really great way of widening the reach of your research. They allow you to present kind of complex ideas in an accessible way to get your message across to more people. And they're also really great for widening the reach of your research and increasing your visibility, especially if you're able to get your blog kind of featured on different platforms. So for instance, I'd really encourage you to look into whether your institute, your department, faculty may have its own blog series that you can contribute to. There may be kind of industry organisations, third sector organisations that have their own series that are looking, I'm sure, always looking for contributors. And then also blogs are a great way for creating opportunities for collaboration with other researchers. You know, if they stumble upon your blog, read about your work, find it interesting, have similar kind of research questions or topics that they're interested in, they can reach out and it can lead to new opportunities for you both. So looking now at some tips then for writing blogs, they don't have to be too long. You can keep it quite short. So we recommend a word count of around 500 to 800 words. Remember that attention spans, particularly on the internet these days, are quite short. So make sure you're creating captivating headlines that really draw your readers in, and be sure to be setting out your key messages in a really strong opening kind of paragraph. Don't just assume that all of your readers are going to read to the end of your blog. You really need to be making sure your kind of key points, recommendations are up front in the centre rather than kind of buried down towards the end of your blog. Also remember that blogs are a way that you can present an argument or a unique opinion or voice. Really think about current topics in circling in the media, anything you can hook your research onto or your findings onto that's going to present a new or an interesting angle on kind of current debates. And when it comes to the language you're using, try to use kind of plain English, avoiding any jargon that can really put people off. Remember that not everyone is going to be an expert in your field. Use the active voice rather than passive, and be consistent in which tense you write in throughout your blog. And we suggest that you break up your content. Remember that writing for the web in particular, readers can really be put off by big, dense blocks of text. So try to use kind of short paragraphs, 1 to 2 sentences long. You can use set headings and subheadings as well to break up your writing, and also images and graphs are a good way to kind of break it up as well. And then looking lastly then at kind of accessibility considerations. This will be a bit of a running theme throughout the next few slides, but it's really important that with these accessible products that you're creating, you're making sure that they are as inclusive as possible. So as I mentioned, that use of plain English and breaking up the content is already going to be helping with kind of accessibility and inclusiveness. You also want to ensure that any images and graphs that you're using, that you're adding alternative text that will be picked up by a screen reader. We would suggest kind of avoiding using images and graphs that have kind of text embedded within them, because that won't get picked up by a screen reader. But you know, if it's unavoidable, then just remember to include that text or a summary of the text or the graph into your alternative text that will get picked up by a screen reader. And then also remember to use descriptive hyperlinks that make sense when read in isolation. So that's around avoiding kind of click here or read more links that don't really tell the user where they're going to go when they click the link. You really want to make sure that it's clear where they're going to be heading, as that can help for accessibility as well. So moving on now to think about infographics. So these can be a really effective tool for communicating your research, and their main purpose is to provide a kind of clear, visually engaging and easy to understand summary of the information you want to get across to your audience. And one of the things that's kind of worth bearing in mind is that thinking that, the human brain processes images a whole lot faster than it does text alone. So using infographics are a really good way of helping your audience to digest complex findings or concept in a kind of quicker and easier than if you were just using text alone. Infographics can also really help you identify your key messages and the kind of crucial details that you need to include around your research when distilling them down into kind of a simple graphic or two. Another really great benefit of infographics is they're really easily shareable on social media. So this can also help with kind of increasing your visibility and the reach of your research. And so lastly, here I just wanted to mention that there are many kind of online platforms out there that are available to you to produce your own infographics, and many of these have free versions, so you're not having to necessarily pay to get kind of premium access. Many will also have their own kind of library of pre-designed templates that you can use or amend to suit your purposes. So the platforms that I would recommend looking into are Canva, Visme, and Pictochart. They're all really user-friendly, and there are lots of kind of tutorials online on YouTube and other kind of, if you Google it, that will help you kind of find your way around these platforms and use them to the best of your ability. So thinking about some best practice for creating your infographics, be sure to be on brand. So this may mean that you need to kind of reach out to your organisation's comms teams to get a copy of their brand guidelines, so you can ensure that you are sticking to the brand. So this might include needing to use kind of particular colours or fonts or logos to make sure that you are adhering to those kind of guidelines. You want to be sure that you're pulling out those key stats that you want to highlight in the graphic, and really try to keep the text to a minimum, keep it quite simple. You really want to kind of be using the visuals to tell your story here rather than kind of relying on too much text. Don't forget also that you will want to kind of include a way that people can get in contact with you or kind of find out more information. So you may want to use a QR code that links out to a research paper or a project page on your website, maybe a blog. Again, there are many sites available online that allow you to generate your own QR codes for free. And then also, it's worth bearing in mind that you really want to think about where you will be sharing your infographic once it's been finalised. So, and you need to be looking at kind of what the best dimensions are for the images that you'll be using. So, for instance, this really is apparent when you're kind of thinking about different social media platforms. They will each have their own kind of ideal dimensions that they want users to use. Again, this information is easily findable online, but it may mean that you need to kind of recreate your infographic in a few different size variations, just so you're hitting those optimum size dimensions on each of the platforms that you'll be using. So lastly here, it's really important, again, to be thinking about accessibility when it comes to creating your own infographics. So in this case, that's ensuring that the colours you're using adhere to correct colour contrast ratios. There are lots of websites and online tools that you can use to help you with this, and it just ensures that anyone with low vision is able to see all of the elements of your infographic. You also want to ensure you're using sans serif fonts as much as possible and kind of large font sizes. Make sure that you're arranging the different elements of your infographic so that they follow a clear hierarchy. So that's kind of, you're thinking about left to right, top to bottom, that kind of structure. And you can also use headings and subheadings to help with kind of making that structure of your infographic clear. And again, it's important to be writing in plain English in your infographics as well. So now looking at using social media and how you can use this to increase your visibility. This relates back to that kind of taste, snack, feast, package approach, the wedding cake approach that Rob has already mentioned. So this is very much that kind of taste aspect, posting about your research, making it short, straight to the point, pulling out those key findings and recommendations, and then linking out to a blog or a research paper or an evidence submission that's got that kind of more detail that people might be looking for. So they are a good vehicle for disseminating research findings as part of that kind of package approach. You can also use them to connect with other researchers and academics, as well as policymakers and relevant organisations that may be interested in the kind of research that you're carrying out. And they're open channels as well for collaboration, knowledge sharing and advice. But it is worth mentioning that the social media landscape has changed massively over the last few years. We've seen the decline of Twitter, and also in response to that, the kind of emergence of new popular platforms that are coming up. Things like LinkedIn and Blue Sky have really kind of risen in popularity over the last few years. So they do remain an effective vehicle to mobilise your research. You just need to think about where your audience is and be active on that platform. So for us, this is LinkedIn, this is where our audience and stakeholders are. It also allows us to kind of take advantage of the different features and functionality that LinkedIn has implemented. So, you can do kind of longer form content. You don't have those same kind of character limits that are on kind of Blue Sky and Twitter. You can tag people, and you can get analytics as well to assess the kind of the reach and the impact of your posts. So thinking about some kind of best practice and advice for using social media, one thing that's really important is being consistent. So make sure that you're really trying to post and engage with other content on a regular basis, and this will really kind of boost your performance in the platform algorithms. You want to ensure that you're taking advantage of the different kind of media files that you can upload. This is particularly important or relevant when thinking about using LinkedIn. So LinkedIn allows you to upload not just images, but kind of slide decks and reports or documents to your post. And these types of posts really perform well in their platform algorithms. So basically kind of prefer content that is going to keep the users on their platforms for longer. So, if you're uploading a short slide deck or a report that someone's going to be clicking through because they're interested and they want to find out more, that's going to perform really well in the algorithms, basically, and it's going to boost the kind of the reach of your posts. Also want to take advantage of being able to tag other users in your posts. This can help with that kind of reach and engagement. And also don't be afraid to kind of ask your colleagues, even offline, to engage with your posts. We often do that within our team when we're posting, and that can really help kind of improve the reach. Also, you can repurpose your content. So don't be kind of put off and thinking, I can't post about kind of the same research findings or the same research paper more than once. Remember that the lifespan of a post on social media is relatively short. So the chances are, the same one person's not going to see all of these different posts. But we would recommend that if you are posting about the same kind of research paper or the same blog, just be sure that you're kind of like pulling out a different aspect to focus on. So maybe there's like a different key finding or recommendation that you want to focus on to keep it a little bit kind of updated and new. And then also it's worth noting kind of there are trolls out there. There are people that may try and bait you into a reaction. Our advice in most of these cases is just to ignore it. You can mute and you can block other users. You can report them as well if they're being inappropriate. The temptation is there to engage and try and set the record straight, but sometimes that's often what these people are wanting is a reaction. So we often just recommend you don't feed the beast and you just let it go. And then lastly, here again, remember accessibility. So for social media, that's all around kind of making sure that you're adding alternative text to any images that you're uploading. The platforms will have kind of in-house functionality that allow you to do that when you're kind of in that uploading stage. And also, we'd really recommend that you use emoji sparingly. So not many people know that when you're using a screen reader, it will read out every emoji that is included in a post. So if you're kind of posting a long line of smiley faces, it will read out smiley face, smiley face, smiley face, smiley face. And as you can imagine, that's quite frustrating for users of screen readers. So we really recommend that you keep your emoji use to a bit of a minimum, kind of 1 or 2 per post is kind of what we see as a good balance there. So looking now then at that wedding cake approach that Rob and Charlotte have both mentioned in practice, we can look at an example from Closer from a few years ago. So we're starting here with that academic paper, that feast aspect. This research was on kind of childhood obesity. And that was our basis then to kind of create this package of work around. So looking now at that kind of snack aspect, we created an evidence submission to a parliamentary committee. summarising that research. And then we also produced a blog that appeared on the Closer website around childhood obesity and pulling out those kind of key findings and recommendations. And then lastly, we've got that taste aspect. So we sent some posts on social media around the research and the findings, and we also created a infographic as well that pulled out those key findings and those key recommendations that we really wanted to highlight. So I'm going to pass over to Rob now, who's going to look at some learning resources and bespoke tools.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jenny. Really hope that that's been a useful session, and you've taken away some useful information and insights. Just going to finish up with the final chapter, just touching on our learning resources and bespoke tools. So we've developed a policy hub, which is designed to help researchers mobilise their evidence in the policy landscape. There's lots of free information, guidance, and bespoke templates and tools. I've mentioned the briefing note tool and the written evidence submission tool as well, to help you on your policy impact and engagement journey. We also have a training hub, and within that training hub, we have a dissemination and impact section. And again, there's free materials, there's lots of guidance and advice on the kind of other elements of dissemination and impact, some of which Jenny touched on. So, how to write blogs, how to produce infographics with lots more information and guidance to help you use those tools. And finally, just wanted to say thank you for listening, and do please sign up to our newsletters. We have a couple of newsletters for those of you who are interested in longitudinal population studies. We have Longitudinal News, which is our monthly newsletter bringing you all the latest news from ourselves, from Closer, and the latest updates, blogs, research, events, and useful resources. We also have a quarterly policy bulletin in the Loop, and that is an update containing the latest developments in the policy landscape, the things that we think you should really know, new opportunities to mobilise your research, for example, parliamentary committees or kind of other calls for evidence, and resources to help improve your knowledge and skills. Thank you.